I'm Catherine, 32 years old. I never imagined my own mother would walk into a courtroom and testify against me, painting me as unstable, incapable, and unfit to raise children. What she didn't know was that for 3 years, I'd been chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Seattle Medical Center. The judge recognized me instantly, and what happened next silenced the entire room. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from, and thank you for being here. Growing up in Spokane, a quiet town in eastern Washington, I always felt like I was performing on a stage where the sole audience member, my mother, Maggie, never applauded. Our modest ranch-style house with its white picket fence looked perfect from the outside, just the way my mother wanted everything in her life to appear. Inside those walls, however, was a different story. My mother was the embodiment of perfectionism. Nothing was ever good enough, especially when it came to me. If I brought home an A-, she would ask why it wasn't an A+. If I scored 95 on a test, she would point out Jenny Mitchell, who scored 100. Her standards were impossible to meet. And her criticism was relentless. Catherine, sit up straight. Catherine, your hair looks messy. Catherine, why can't you be more like the Henderson girl? She's already volunteering at the hospital. Her words followed me everywhere, echoing in my head even when she wasn't around. I tried desperately to please her, rearranging myself into configurations I thought might finally earn her approval. It never came. My father, Bob, was the buffer between us. He was a kind man with gentle eyes and calloused hands from his work as a carpenter. He would wink at me across the dinner table whenever my mother started in on one of her critical tangents. "Your mother just wants what's best for you," he would tell me later. But his eyes held an apology. He loved her, but he saw how her words cut into me like scalpels. When I was 14, my father had a construction accident. A scaffolding collapsed while he was working on a new office building downtown. He died instantly. I lost my defender, my ally, the only person who made me feel like I was enough just as I was. After his death, my mother changed. Her criticism intensified, as if she needed to compensate for the absence of his gentleness with an extra dose of her harshness. She became obsessed with appearances, with what the neighbors might think, with maintaining the illusion of the perfect family despite our obvious brokenness. "We need to be strong, Catherine," she would say. "No one respects weakness." But what she meant was that she didn't want me to grieve publicly, to show any sign that we were struggling. My tears were relegated to my pillow at night, silent and hidden. School became my refuge. I threw myself into academics with a fervor that surprised even my teachers. If I couldn't earn my mother's approval, I would earn it from everyone else. Each perfect test score, each academic award was a shield I held up against her criticism. They rarely worked. "Sarah Martinez's daughter just got into Stanford early decision," she would say, ignoring my straight A report card on the table between us. "And she's already shadowing doctors at the hospital." I wasn't shadowing doctors. I wasn't exceptional in any way that mattered to my mother. But I discovered something during those painful teenage years. I had a passion for healing. It started in biology class, where I found myself fascinated by the human body, by how everything worked together in perfect harmony. It continued when I volunteered at the local animal shelter and felt for the first time like I was exactly where I belonged, helping creatures that couldn't help themselves. When I told my mother I wanted to be a doctor someday, maybe even a surgeon, she laughed. Not a kind laugh, but the dismissive kind that made my stomach turn. "Be realistic, Catherine. Those positions are for people with connections, with pedigrees. Focus on something attainable. Teaching is a noble profession." In that moment, standing in our kitchen with my future dreams freshly ridiculed, something shifted inside me. Her words, instead of crushing me as they usually did, hardened into a determination that would carry me forward. I would become a surgeon. Not despite what my mother believed about me, but because of it. I would prove her wrong. College applications became my secret rebellion. I applied to 17 schools without telling my mother about most of them. When the acceptance letters started arriving, including one from the University of Washington with a partial scholarship, I felt a surge of power. For once, I had options that weren't dictated by her expectations. "University of Washington is too expensive," she said dismissively when I showed her the letter. "The community college has a perfectly adequate pre-nursing program." I went to University of Washington anyway. To cover what the scholarship didn't, I worked 3 jobs. mornings at a coffee shop near campus, evenings at the university library, and weekends as a research assistant for one of my professors. I barely slept. My mother called it stubbornness. I called it independence. Medical school applications followed the same pattern. I studied obsessively for the MCAT, scored in the 98th percentile, and earned a spot at Johns Hopkins. When I called to tell my mother, her response was predictable. Johns Hopkins? How do you expect to pay for that? Always reaching beyond your means, Catherine. I didn't tell her about the full scholarship. I didn't tell her about the research grant. I didn't tell her about the continuing jobs that would help me make ends meet. I simply said, "I'll figure it out," and hung up. Johns Hopkins Medical School was where I met Michael. He sat next to me in Human Anatomy, this tall, thoughtful man with kind eyes that reminded me painfully of my father. Unlike everyone else who seemed to be competing for attention, Michael asked questions that showed he was actually listening to the answers. He noticed things, including me. "You never talk about your family," he observed one night as we studied together in the library. We had been dating for 3 months by then. "Not much to talk about," I replied, keeping my eyes on my textbook. "Everyone has a story," he said quietly. That night, I told him about my mother, about her impossible standards and constant criticism, about how I had spent my entire life trying and failing to be good enough. Michael listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he took my hand. "She's wrong about you," he said simply, "and someday she'll realize that." I married Michael in our final year of medical school. My mother attended the small ceremony, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, as she straightened my simple dress in the back room of the courthouse where we held the ceremony. "Marriage and a medical career don't mix well. You'll have to choose eventually." I didn't bother responding. I was done trying to convince her of anything. After graduation, both Michael and I matched into residencies in Baltimore. His focus was pediatrics. Mine was surgery. I worked 80-hour weeks, determined to distinguish myself. When an opportunity came to specialize in cardiothoracic surgery, I leaped at it. The specialty was demanding, unforgiving, and absolutely perfect for me. In the operating room, precision mattered. Excellence was rewarded. There was no room for self-doubt when someone's life hung in the balance. For the first time in my life, I found a place where being demanding of myself was not just acceptable, but necessary. My mother remained unimpressed with my progress. "Another new program? Can't stick with anything, can you?" she commented during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. I stopped telling her about my career progress after that. Let her believe what she wanted. I knew the truth. I wasn't jumping from program to program. I was climbing. When Sophie was born 3 years later, my life expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. This tiny human with Michael's kind eyes and my stubborn chin became the center of my universe. For the first time, I understood what it meant to love someone unconditionally. I vowed that my daughter would never question her worth the way I had been forced to question mine. Balancing motherhood and my surgical career was challenging. There were nights when I rocked Sophie to sleep with one arm while reviewing surgical notes with the other. There were mornings when I showed up to the OR having slept 3 hours, with baby formula stains on my scrubs. But I made it work. Michael and I were partners in every sense, trading off responsibilities and supporting each other's ambitions. When the call came about the position at Seattle Medical Center, I was changing Sophie's diaper. I was 29 years old, and they were offering me the position of attending cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the youngest in the country. The department head had been impressed by my research on minimally invasive valve repair techniques. The position was in Seattle, exactly where I wanted to be. Close enough to visit my mother, but far enough to maintain my independence. I accepted immediately. That night, Michael brought home champagne, and we celebrated in our small apartment with Sophie babbling happily between us on the couch. "Are you going to tell your mother?" Michael asked gently. I considered it for a moment. I imagined her pride, her realization that she had been wrong about me all along. Then reality reasserted itself. "No," I said finally. She would find a way to diminish it, to make it seem less than what it is. So my mother continued to believe that I was professionally unstable, jumping from job to job, unable to commit to a career path. Meanwhile, I donned surgical scrubs each morning and performed heart surgery that saved lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, I served as an attending surgeon, and then as chief of cardiothoracic surgery, while my mother remained ignorant of my position. We maintained a distant relationship, obligatory holiday visits, and occasional phone calls that left me drained. She doted on Sophie but couldn't resist criticizing my parenting. She seems very attached to that pacifier. You know that will ruin her teeth. Is that what you're feeding her? No wonder she's so fussy. You work too much. Children need their mother present. I learned to let her words roll off me, protecting both myself and Sophie from their sting. What I didn't know was that my mother was collecting these moments, storing them away like ammunition for a battle I didn't yet know was coming. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was in my office reviewing surgical schedules when my brother Daniel's name flashed on my phone screen. Daniel and I had never been close. 3 years younger than me, he had been our mother's worry child, the one who got into trouble, who made poor choices, who seemed determined to prove every negative expectation right. Kate, his voice was thin, desperate. I need help. He was calling from county jail, drug possession, violation of parole, his third strike. But that wasn't the worst part. His twin boys, Lucas and Mason, ages 5, had been found alone in their apartment while Daniel was passed out from an overdose. Child Protective Services had intervened. They say I can't have them back until I complete the program and prove I can stay clean, he said, his voice breaking. They're talking about foster care, Kate. Please don't let them put my boys in foster care. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what he was asking. Michael and I had discussed taking in Daniel's children before, during his previous crises, but it had never come to this point. Now it was real. These children, my nephews, whom I had only met a handful of times, needed a home. Let me talk to Michael, I said. We'll figure something out. Michael didn't hesitate. Of course we'll take them, he said that night as we sat at our kitchen table after Sophie had gone to bed. They're family. The next morning, I contacted CPS and began the process of applying for temporary custody of Lucas and Mason. The social worker seemed relieved that a family member was stepping forward. The children had been in emergency foster care for 3 days, frightened and confused. There's just one thing, the social worker mentioned near the end of our call. Your mother has also filed for custody. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother, the woman who had criticized every parenting choice I had ever made, wanted to take on 2 traumatized children. It made no sense. Are you sure? I asked stupidly. Yes. Margaret Williams filed yesterday. She said she's the maternal grandmother and believes the children would be better off with her. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't about Lucas and Mason. This was about control, about proving that she, not I, knew what was best for children. It was the ultimate statement of her lack of faith in me as a mother. I tried calling her immediately, but she didn't answer. Instead, she sent a text. We'll let the courts decide what's best for the children. The courts, my domain, except that I couldn't preside over a case involving my own family, and my mother knew that. What she didn't know was that I would be appearing in court not as a judge, but as a petitioner for custody, potentially revealing my profession in the process. The first mediation session was scheduled for the following week. I took personal leave from my surgical duties, citing a family emergency. Dr. Patricia Chen, the chief of staff, was understanding. Take whatever time you need, she said. Family comes first. I arrived at the mediation room to find my mother already seated, her posture rigid, her face set in that familiar expression of disapproval. She wore a navy blue suit that looked new, her hair freshly colored and styled. Every detail calculated to project the image of a capable, responsible grandmother. Hello, Mother, I said, sitting across from her. Catherine, she nodded slightly. I assume you understand why I had to do this. Actually, no, I don't understand at all. Michael and I are perfectly capable of caring for Lucas and Mason. She gave a small, dismissive sniff. You've always put your career first. These children need stability, attention, proper guidance. They need someone who will be present. The mediator, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, entered before I could respond to this insult. She explained the process and asked us each to state our case for why we should have custody of the children. I spoke of our home, with its spare bedrooms that could easily accommodate both children. I talked about Sophie, who was excited to meet her cousins. I explained that Michael and I had flexible work arrangements that would allow us to be available for the children while maintaining our careers. Then my mother spoke, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. My daughter, she began, her voice dripping with concern, has never been able to maintain stability in her life. She jumps from job to job, never settling, always chasing the next opportunity. Her husband works long hours, and she leaves her own daughter with a nanny most days. These traumatized children need constant care and attention, which I am prepared to provide. I am retired, with a comfortable home and savings. I can dedicate myself to them fully. The mediator looked at me. Would you like to respond to your mother's characterization of your employment history? I opened my mouth, then closed it. A part of me wanted to shout the truth. I am a surgeon. I am the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. But another part, the wounded child still seeking approval, couldn't form the words. Instead, I said, my employment is stable. I can provide documentation. My mother smiled thinly. We'll see. The mediation ended without resolution. As we left, my mother touched my arm, stopping me in the hallway. I'm doing this for the children's sake, she said. You must see that they would be better off with me. No, mother. What I see is that you've never believed in me. And this is just one more way to prove it. Her eyes narrowed. If you really cared about those children, you would step aside. I pulled my arm away. If you really cared about me, you would have supported me just once in my life. I walked away, my hands shaking. This was no longer just about Lucas and Mason, though they remained my primary concern. This was about 3 decades of criticism and doubt. This was about finally standing up to the woman who had never thought I was good enough. What I didn't know then was how far she would go to win. She's gathering evidence against you, my attorney, Sarah Chen, informed me during our preparation session for the custody hearing. We sat in her office, a sunlit space with views of the Seattle skyline that contrasted sharply with the darkness of our conversation. Evidence? What kind of evidence? I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. Sarah slid a folder across her desk. Your mother has submitted a detailed account of what she calls your parental deficiencies. She has dates, incidents, quotes. She claims you've been neglectful of Sophie and would be similarly neglectful of Lucas and Mason. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were pages of meticulously documented criticisms, spanning from Sophie's birth to our most recent family gathering 3 months ago. Every perceived mistake, every parenting choice my mother disagreed with, all carefully noted with dates and circumstances. April 3rd, 3 years ago, Catherine arrived 45 minutes late to Easter dinner. Sophie was fussy and appeared overtired. When I suggested the child needed a more consistent schedule, Catherine dismissed my concern. November 28th last year, found Sophie playing unsupervised in the living room while Catherine was on her phone in the kitchen. Child could have injured herself on numerous hazards. On and on the list went. A chronicle of manufactured inadequacies that made me look like a careless, self-absorbed mother. The final entry turned my blood cold. June 10th this year, Catherine admitted she sometimes takes work calls during Sophie's dinner time. Prioritizes career over child's basic needs. Pattern of behavior suggests fundamental unsuitability for taking on additional childcare responsibilities. She's been planning this, I whispered. All those visits, those times she offered to watch Sophie, she was building a case against me. Sarah nodded grimly. And she's recruited witnesses. Your Aunt Claire, your cousin Beth, even your old neighbor Mrs. Patterson. All prepared to testify about your supposed shortcomings as a parent. I leaned back in my chair, feeling like the air had been sucked from the room. They don't even know me. I see Aunt Claire once a year at Christmas. Beth moved to Portland 5 years ago, and Mrs. Patterson, she moved away when Sophie was a toddler. Your mother can be very persuasive, it seems, Sarah said. And people are often willing to make statements about things they have minimal direct knowledge of, especially when it comes to family matters. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Home with Sophie. Social worker just left after home evaluation. Went well, I think. Love you. At least that was something. Our home was clean, safe, and child-friendly. We had already prepared rooms for Lucas and Mason, with twin beds, colorful bedding, and age-appropriate toys. The social worker had seemed impressed with our preparation and Sophie's obvious happiness and well-being. What about my job? I asked Sarah. She keeps saying I jump from job to job. When the truth comes out that I've been the chief of cardiothoracic surgery for 3 years, that's actually our strongest counterpoint, isn't it? Sarah confirmed. The revelation about your career stability and position will significantly undermine her credibility. But Catherine, I have to ask, why did you never tell her about being a surgeon? I stared out the window at the city below, considering the question. At first, it was because I knew she would find some way to diminish it, to make it seem less than what it was. Then, as time passed, it became, a boundary. The one part of my life she couldn't criticize, because she didn't know about it. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Well, she's about to find out in the most public way possible. The hearing is scheduled for next week, and Judge Jennifer Walsh will be presiding. Walsh? But she knows me. She sits on the hospital board. Exactly. When your mother claimed you were unstable professionally, the court clerk recognized your name and brought it to Judge Walsh's attention. She specifically requested to take the case. A small spark of hope flickered inside me. Judge Walsh was fair and principled. She wouldn't show favoritism, but she would ensure the truth came to light. That evening, as Michael and I sat on our back deck after putting Sophie to bed, I showed him my mother's documented list of my failures. This is insane, he said, his voice tight with anger. These are completely normal parenting moments, twisted to sound neglectful. Being late to Easter dinner makes you an unfit mother? Taking a work call during dinner occasionally means you don't care about your child? By these standards, no parent would qualify as adequate. I leaned against his shoulder, exhausted. She's always been like this. Nothing I do is ever good enough. But I never thought she would go this far. We'll fight this, Michael said firmly, and we'll win. The truth is on our side. But as the hearing approached, my confidence wavered. Rumors were spreading through the medical community about the case. Colleagues looked at me with curiosity or pity. I had taken a leave of absence from my surgical duties, but the hospital was still my workplace, and now it would be the stage for this painful family drama. 2 days before the hearing, Michael found me sitting on the floor of what would be Lucas and Mason's room, surrounded by children's books, crying silently. Catherine, he said, sitting beside me and taking my hand. Talk to me. What if she's right, I whispered. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't give these children what they need? Michael took my face in his hands, forcing me to look at him. Listen to me. You are an exceptional mother to Sophie. You will be an exceptional aunt and guardian to Lucas and Mason. Your mother's voice in your head is not the truth. It never has been. I nodded, wanting desperately to believe him. The day before the hearing, we met with Lucas and Mason for our first supervised visit. CPS had arranged it at their offices, a sterile environment that did nothing to ease the tension. They were beautiful children with Daniel's dark hair and solemn eyes that had seen too much. Lucas, the more outgoing twin, was protective of his quieter brother Mason, constantly checking to make sure he was okay. Hi, I said, kneeling to their level. I'm your Aunt Kate, and this is your Uncle Michael, and this is your cousin Sophie. Sophie, excited to meet her cousins, stepped forward with a book in her hands. Do you like stories? She asked them. Lucas nodded cautiously. Me too, Sophie said, and sat down cross-legged on the floor, patting the space beside her. Slowly, Lucas and Mason joined her, and as Sophie began to read the book she had memorized, I saw the first hint of relaxation in their small bodies. Michael squeezed my hand, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that we were doing the right thing. These children belonged with us, as part of our family, and I would fight with everything I had to make that happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the courtroom, my mother's accusations, the public revelation of my career. Tomorrow, everything would change. For better or worse, the truth would finally come out. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright. A beautiful June day that belied the storm, brewing inside the King County Family Court building. I stood on the steps of the building, feeling strangely disoriented. This was supposed to be familiar territory, courtrooms, legal proceedings. But today, I felt like an outsider looking in. Ready? Michael asked, his hand steady on my back. I nodded, though ready was the last thing I felt. We had dressed carefully that morning, professional but approachable. I wore a navy blue dress with a light cardigan, deliberate choices to project stability and warmth. Michael was in a gray suit, his lucky tie, the one Sophie had picked out for him on his last birthday. Inside, the courthouse was already bustling with the day's business. A few people I recognized from the medical community nodded to me as we passed, their expressions carefully neutral. News of the case had spread, and I could feel curious eyes following us as we made our way to the designated courtroom. My mother was already there, seated beside her attorney, a sharp-featured man named Mark Davidson, known for his aggressive tactics in family court. She wore a conservative gray suit with a pearl necklace, her hair perfectly styled, the very picture of a dignified grandmother. When she saw me, she straightened her shoulders but didn't acknowledge me otherwise. Lucas and Mason's social worker, Miss Rodriguez, sat in the front row, a thick file on her lap. She had visited both our home and my mother's during the evaluation process. Her report would carry significant weight in the judge's decision. At precisely 9, the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Jennifer Walsh entered. Tall and imposing in her black robes, with silver threaded through her dark hair, she commanded respect merely by her presence. She nodded to the court and took her seat. "We are here in the matter of guardianship for minors Lucas and Mason Williams," she began, her voice clear and authoritative. "I understand both the maternal aunt, Dr. Catherine Harrison, and the maternal grandmother, Margaret Williams, are seeking custody." The preliminary matters proceeded with formal statements from both attorneys. Sarah presented our case first, highlighting our stable home, financial security, and commitment to keeping the siblings together in a loving family environment with their cousin. She mentioned my stable employment without specifying my role as a surgeon, as we had agreed to let that revelation come naturally. Then Mark Davidson rose for my mother's case. His opening statement painted a picture of my mother as the selfless grandmother willing to devote her retirement years to raising her grandchildren, contrasted with me, the supposedly career-obsessed niece who couldn't be relied upon. "Your Honor," he concluded, "we will present evidence that Dr. Harrison's home environment and work history make her fundamentally unsuitable as a guardian for these vulnerable children." I felt Michael tense beside me at these words. I squeezed his hand silently, urging him to remain calm. We had anticipated this approach. The first witnesses were character references for both sides. Michael's parents testified to our parenting abilities and stable home. My colleague from the hospital, Dr. James Liu, carefully avoided mentioning my surgical role while attesting to my character and integrity. Then came my mother's witnesses. Aunt Claire took the stand nervously, avoiding my gaze as she confirmed that she had concerns about my parenting based on family gatherings, where I seemed distracted with Sophie. On cross-examination, Sarah established that Aunt Claire had only seen me with Sophie 4 times in 8 years, hardly enough to form a comprehensive opinion of my parenting. My cousin Beth testified via video link from Portland, repeating almost verbatim phrases I recognized from my mother's documented list of my failures. When Sarah asked when she had last seen me in person, she admitted it had been 5 years ago, at a family reunion when Sophie was 3 years old. By mid-morning, it was my mother's turn to testify. She settled into the witness stand with the composed confidence of someone who believed absolutely in her own righteousness. Mark Davidson led her through prepared questions about her relationship with Lucas and Mason, her home, her financial stability, and her availability to care for the children. Then came the attack I had been dreading. "Mrs. Williams, do you have concerns about your daughter's ability to provide a stable home for these children?" Davidson asked. My mother sighed, a performance of reluctance that made my teeth clench. "I don't want to speak ill of my daughter," she began, the very definition of speaking ill. "But Catherine has always struggled with commitment and follow-through. As a mother, I've watched her jump from interest to interest, job to job, never settling. Even with Sophie, she seems more concerned with her career than her child's needs." "Could you elaborate on her employment history?" Davidson prompted. This was it, the moment of reckoning. My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a tone of sad concern. "Catherine has never held a job for more than a year or 2. Right after medical school, she worked at some clinic, then left to do some kind of residency program, then became some kind of fellow, then something else. She constantly changes positions, always claiming it's a step up, but never finding satisfaction. She can barely hold a job." A murmur ran through the courtroom. I sat perfectly still, feeling strangely calm now that the accusation had finally been made explicit. Michael's hand tightened around mine. "And you believe this employment instability affects her parenting?" Davidson continued. "Of course it does. Children need consistency, stability. Catherine's restlessness, her constant career changes, create an unpredictable environment. Lucas and Mason have already experienced too much instability with my son's issues. They need a rock, not another person whose priorities lie elsewhere." I felt a tear slide down my cheek and brushed it away quickly. These weren't just cruel words. They were a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was, who I had always been. My mother truly believed I was incapable, unreliable, inadequate. When Mark Davidson finished his questioning, Sarah stood for cross-examination. She approached the witness stand with measured steps. "Mrs. Williams," she began, "when was the last time your daughter told you about a job change?" My mother frowned slightly. "She doesn't always tell me directly, but I know she has moved around frequently in the medical profession." "So you don't actually know her current employment status or position?" "I know she works as some kind of doctor," my mother said dismissively. "The specifics change so often, it's hard to keep track." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce evidence regarding Dr. Harrison's employment history." Judge Walsh nodded. "Proceed." Sarah handed a document to the court clerk, who passed copies to the judge, my mother's attorney, and my mother. "This is a verified record of Catherine Harrison's employment history since graduating from Johns Hopkins Medical School 9 years ago." My mother glanced at the paper, her expression unchanged. "Mrs. Williams, would you please read the final entry on that employment record?" Sarah requested. My mother squinted at the document. It says, "Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, Seattle Medical Center. Duration, 3 years to present." She looked up, confusion crossing her features. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Every eye moved between my mother and me. Judge Walsh cleared her throat. "For the record," she said, her voice resonating in the quiet room, "I can confirm that Dr. Catherine Harrison has served as Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Seattle Medical Center for the past 3 years. She is one of the youngest department chiefs in the country and has an exemplary record, particularly in pediatric cardiac procedures." My mother's face went white. Her hand, still holding the employment record, trembled visibly. "She has been the chief of surgery for 3 years," Judge Walsh repeated, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. Mark Davidson leaned over to whisper something to my mother, who shook her head slightly, still staring at me with an expression of disbelief. "Mrs. Williams," Sarah continued gently, "given this information, would you like to revise your statement about your daughter's employment stability?" My mother swallowed hard. I was not aware of this position." "Because your daughter stopped informing you about her career achievements after years of having them dismissed and criticized. Is that correct?" Before my mother could answer, Mark Davidson stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying." "Sustained," Judge Walsh said. "Ms. Chen, please rephrase." Sarah nodded. "Mrs. Williams, when was the last time you expressed pride or approval regarding one of your daughter's career accomplishments?" My mother's gaze dropped to her hands. "I don't recall specifically." "No further questions, Your Honor," Sarah said, returning to her seat beside me. As my mother stepped down from the witness stand, her shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. For the first time in my memory, she looked small. The next witness was Miss Rodriguez, the social worker, who testified that both homes were physically appropriate for the children, but that her recommendation favored placement with us, due to the presence of a cousin close in age and the strong family unit we had demonstrated. Finally, it was my turn to testify. As I took the oath, I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out now. Whatever happened next, I would no longer be carrying the weight of that secret. Sarah led me through questions about our home, our plans for integrating Lucas and Mason into our family, and my relationship with my brother Daniel. Then she addressed the elephant in the room. "Catherine, could you explain to the court why you never informed your mother about your position as chief of surgery?" I took a deep breath and looked directly at my mother for the first time that day. From the time I was a child, nothing I did was ever good enough. Every achievement was met with criticism, every goal dismissed as unrealistic. When I was appointed to my position 3 years ago, I made the decision not to share that information with my mother because I wanted one part of my life to be free from her judgment. I wanted to do my job without hearing all the ways she thought I was failing at it. The courtroom was silent as I continued. I am not an unstable person. I am not an inadequate mother. I have built a career I'm proud of, a family I cherish, and a home where Sophie thrives. Lucas and Mason deserve that same environment. They deserve to grow up believing in themselves, not constantly questioning their worth. When Sarah finished her questions, Mark Davidson declined to cross-examine me. There was nothing left to challenge. Judge Walsh called a recess before delivering her decision. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of my mother sitting alone on a bench in the hallway, looking lost. For a moment, I almost went to her. Then Michael touched my arm, and we walked outside to breathe in the fresh air and prepare for whatever came next. The courtroom seemed more crowded when we returned after the recess, word having spread about the dramatic revelation. I kept my eyes forward as we took our seats, avoiding the curious glances from spectators. My mother entered last, her attorney guiding her to their table. She looked diminished somehow, her earlier confidence replaced by a stiff uncertainty. When our eyes briefly met, she quickly looked away, a gesture that spoke volumes about how the power dynamic between us had shifted. Judge Walsh returned to the bench, her expression unreadable as she settled into her chair and arranged the papers before her. The courtroom fell silent in anticipation. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented today, she began. I have reached a decision in the matter of guardianship for Lucas and Mason Williams. She outlined the factors considered: the stability of both households, the relationship with the children, the support systems in place, and the recommendations of the social worker. I held my breath, feeling Michael's hand tighten around mine. While I recognize Mrs. Williams's genuine desire to care for her grandchildren, I find that placement with Dr. Catherine and Dr. Michael Harrison provides the most beneficial environment for the children at this time. The presence of a cousin close in age, the demonstrated parenting capabilities, and the strong recommendation of the social worker all support this decision. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that for a moment I couldn't hear anything else the judge was saying. We had won. Lucas and Mason would be coming home with us. Additionally, Judge Walsh continued, I am ordering a visitation schedule that includes regular contact with Mrs. Williams, recognizing the importance of maintaining that grandparent relationship. The details of this schedule will be worked out with the assistance of family services. My mother's attorney leaned over to whisper something to her, but she shook her head slightly, her eyes fixed on the surface of the table before her. This court will retain jurisdiction to modify these arrangements as circumstances change, including potential reunification with the father upon successful completion of his rehabilitation program. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, and the tension that had held me rigid throughout the hearing finally released. Michael embraced me, and I buried my face against his shoulder, overwhelmed with emotion. Congratulations, Sarah said warmly as people began to file out of the courtroom. This is the right outcome for those children. I nodded, unable to form words past the lump in my throat. As we gathered our things to leave, I noticed my mother still seated at her table, now alone, as her attorney spoke with the court clerk across the room. On impulse, I approached her. Mother, I said softly. She looked up, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Hurt, certainly. Anger, perhaps. But also something that might have been shame. 3 years, she said, her voice barely audible. You've been chief of surgery for 3 years, and I didn't know. You never asked, I replied simply. You assumed I was failing. She flinched slightly at my words. I was trying to protect you from disappointment. The world is harsh, Catherine. I wanted you to be prepared. By making sure I never felt good enough. That wasn't protection, Mother. That was control. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You've always been so stubborn, so convinced you knew better than me. And I proved I did, I said, not unkindly. Mother, I built a life you know nothing about because you never bothered to really see me, to listen to me. You created a version of me in your head that doesn't exist. She looked away, gathering her purse and standing abruptly. The judge said I get visitation with the children. Yes, and we'll honor that. But there will be boundaries, Mother. I will not allow Lucas and Mason to grow up feeling the way I did, constantly criticized and diminished. I never, she began, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, she seemed at a loss for words. We can talk about arrangements next week, I said. For now, Michael and I need to prepare for bringing Lucas and Mason home. I turned to go, but her voice stopped me. Catherine, she hesitated. Congratulations on becoming chief of surgery. That is quite an achievement. The words were stiff, awkward, as if she was speaking a foreign language. But they were the closest thing to approval she had offered me in decades. I nodded once in acknowledgement, then walked away to join Michael and Sarah by the door. Outside the courthouse, the bright afternoon sunlight felt symbolic, illuminating a new chapter in all our lives. Michael called the social worker to arrange for Lucas and Mason to move in the following day. I stood on the steps, breathing deeply, feeling both victorious and strangely sad. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, slipping his arm around my waist. "Yes," I said. "It's just, I never wanted it to come to this. A public confrontation, our family issues exposed in court. I know, but maybe it needed to happen. Your mother has been living in a fiction of her own creation for years. Now she has to face reality." We drove home to prepare for the children's arrival, stopping to buy a welcome banner that Sophie insisted on making herself. As I helped her with the letters, carefully guiding her small hands, I made a silent vow that these children would always know they were enough, exactly as they were. That evening, as we finished dinner, the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it while I helped Sophie with her dessert. A moment later, he returned to the kitchen with an unexpected visitor. My mother stood awkwardly in our dining room, looking out of place and uncomfortable. Sophie, always friendly, waved happily. "Hi, Grandma Maggie." "Hello, Sophie," my mother said, her voice softer than usual. Then to me, "May I speak with you privately?" Michael nodded to me. "I'll get Sophie ready for bath time. Take your time." I led my mother to the living room, gesturing for her to sit on the couch while I took the chair opposite. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Your home is lovely," she finally said, glancing around at the comfortable, lived-in space with toys neatly corralled in colorful bins and family photos on every surface. "Thank you," I replied, waiting for whatever had brought her here. She smoothed her skirt over her knees, a nervous gesture I had rarely seen from her. "I've been thinking about what happened today, about what you said." I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. "Perhaps I have been too critical over the years. I thought I was preparing you for a world that would judge you harshly. I didn't want you to be disappointed when things didn't work out as you hoped. But things did work out, Mother. I became exactly what I said I wanted to be. And you missed it because you were so certain I would fail." She flinched slightly. "Yes, I see that now." She paused, struggling visibly with what to say next. "Catherine, I don't know how to be different than I am. But I would like to try, for Lucas and Mason's sake, and for Sophie's, and perhaps for ours as well." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my mother it was extraordinary. An acknowledgement, at least, that something needed to change. "It will take time," I said carefully. "Trust is built slowly, especially after it's been broken repeatedly." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand. I just want a chance." "We can start with the visitation schedule for Lucas and Mason," I offered. "Perhaps you could come for Sunday dinners. Spend some time getting to know them in our home first, where they feel safe." "I would like that," she said. As she rose to leave, she paused by the mantel where a photo stood of me in my surgical scrubs, Michael and Sophie beside me at a hospital fundraising gala. "You look very professional," she said quietly. "Your father would have been proud." She left before I could respond, the mention of my father bringing a fresh ache to my heart. I stood in the doorway, watching her walk to her car, this complicated woman who had shaped so much of who I was, for better and worse. Michael found me there a few minutes later, still looking out at the now empty street. "What did she want?" he asked gently. "A second chance, I think." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Are you going to give it to her?" I considered the question carefully. Not unconditionally, but yes, a chance. For the children's sake, and maybe for hers too. She's not young anymore, Michael. I don't want to look back someday and regret not trying. He nodded against my shoulder. "You've always been the strongest person I know, Catherine Harrison, and the most compassionate." That night, as I checked on Sophie one last time before bed, watching her peaceful sleep in the glow of her nightlight, I thought about the legacy we pass to our children, not just our features or our mannerisms, but our wounds, our fears, our beliefs about ourselves and the world. I had spent 32 years believing I was never quite good enough, because that was what my mother had taught me. I would not pass that belief to Sophie or to Lucas and Mason. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Integrating 2 traumatized children into our home, establishing boundaries with my mother, balancing my return to surgery with my expanded family responsibilities. But tonight, in the quiet of my daughter's room, I felt ready for whatever came next. For the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty that I was enough. 3 months after the courtroom revelation, I stood in the pre-op area adjusting my surgical cap before heading into the OR. The familiar weight of my scrubs settled on my shoulders, a physical reminder of the authority I had earned and the responsibility I carried. On the wall of my locker hung 3 photos, one of Michael and me on our wedding day, one of Sophie at her 6th birthday party, and a new addition, Lucas and Mason laughing as they played in our backyard sprinkler with Sophie. My return to surgery after the custody hearing had been met with quiet respect from my colleagues. No one mentioned the case directly, but I had received several notes of support and the occasional knowing nod in the hospital hallways. Dr. Patricia Chen had stopped by my office on my first day back. "Family comes first, Catherine," she had said simply. "But we're glad to have you back. The patients who come through this OR need surgeons who understand what's truly at stake." I had thanked her, not just for her words, but for her role in supporting me through the process. She had waved away my gratitude. The truth has a way of emerging when it's most needed. At home, we had settled into a new rhythm with 5 of us instead of 3. Lucas and Mason had arrived with small suitcases and guarded expressions. Uncertain of this new arrangement, Sophie had immediately appointed herself their personal tour guide, showing them the backyard tire swing, the secret cupboard under the stairs where we kept board games, and the kitchen drawer dedicated to art supplies. "You can have anything in here," she had told them solemnly, "except the glitter. That's only for special projects because Daddy says it multiplies when you're not looking." The first few weeks had been challenging. Mason had nightmares that sent him screaming into wakefulness, his small body shaking with terror until one of us could reach him. Lucas, protective and watchful, had initially insisted on supervising every interaction between his brother and us, as if he didn't quite trust that we would take proper care of him. Michael and I had established a stable routine, understanding that consistency would help them feel secure. Bedtimes, meals, playtimes, all followed a predictable pattern. Slowly, the children began to relax. Mason's nightmares became less frequent. Lucas started to play more and supervise less. They began to feel like part of our family, rather than visitors in our home. Daniel called weekly from the rehabilitation center, his voice stronger each time he spoke to his children. There was a determination in his voice that had been absent during his previous attempts at recovery. "I'm getting better," he told them. "Aunt Kate and Uncle Michael will take good care of you until I can. I'm learning how to be the daddy you deserve." I had visited him twice, seeing for myself the progress he was making. This time felt different from his previous attempts at sobriety. There was a clear-eyed acceptance of his responsibility that gave me hope. "Thank you," he had said during my last visit, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "For giving my boys a home, for not giving up on me." "We're family," I had replied simply. "We take care of each other." My mother had been keeping her word about trying to change. Sunday dinners had become a regular occurrence, with her arriving precisely at 4:30 each week, a homemade dessert or children's book in hand. She was different with Lucas and Mason than she had been with me, more patient, less critical. I watched her interact with them and with Sophie, noting the effort she made to praise their accomplishments, to listen to their stories, to engage with them on their level. With me, she was still learning. Old habits emerged in unguarded moments, a critical comment about my cooking or a skeptical look when I mentioned a difficult case at the hospital. But now she would catch herself, sometimes mid-sentence, and redirect. "This chicken is a bit dry," she had said at one dinner, then paused, visibly recalibrating. "But the flavor is wonderful. Would you share the recipe?" It was progress, awkward and imperfect, but sincere. We were building something new between us, not the unconditional mother-daughter bond I had yearned for as a child, but a respectful relationship between adults who were trying to understand each other better. The most significant conversation had come unexpectedly on an ordinary Tuesday evening when she had stopped by to drop off a jacket Lucas had left at her house. The children were already in bed, and Michael was working late. We had ended up sitting on the back deck, watching fireflies rise from the lawn as twilight settled around us. "I found your father's journals," she said abruptly. "When I was cleaning out the attic last week. I never knew he kept them." I turned to look at her, surprised. "Dad kept journals?" She nodded. "For years, it seems. I've been reading them." She hesitated, then continued. "He wrote about you often, about how proud he was of your determination, your sense of justice. He believed you would do extraordinary things." The mention of my father, gone for so long now, brought a familiar ache. "He never told me that." "No," she agreed softly. "He told me instead, repeatedly. Bob always said I was too hard on you, that I would make you doubt yourself." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't listen. I thought he was too soft, that he would leave you unprepared for life's disappointments." "He balanced you," I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke, "until he was gone, and then there was only your voice left." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Catherine, for not seeing you clearly, for not trusting you to find your own way." The words came haltingly, as if each one required great effort. "I was so afraid you would be hurt by failure, that I never gave you room to succeed." It was the apology I had waited decades to hear. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but didn't try to hide them. "Thank you for saying that." We sat in silence as darkness fell completely, the space between us filled with unspoken words and shared history. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, not an erasing of past wounds, but it was a beginning. In the months that followed, I found myself reflecting often on the nature of judgment, both in my operating room and in my personal life. How quick we are to assess others based on incomplete information, to assign motives and capabilities based on our own fears and experiences, rather than seeing what is truly before us. As a surgeon, I had always prided myself on my objectivity, my ability to see past surface appearances to the truth beneath. Yet I had failed to recognize how my mother's judgment of me had shaped my own self-perception, how I had carried her critical voice within me even as I built a life that defied her expectations. One evening, as I helped Lucas with his homework while Mason and Sophie built an elaborate fort in the living room, Michael came to stand in the doorway, watching us with a smile. "What?" I asked, noticing his expression. "Just thinking about how far we've all come," he said. "Lucas asked me today if he could call us Mom and Dad sometimes. Not to replace his father," he was careful to explain, "but because he feels like he has two sets of parents now." I glanced at Lucas, bent studiously over his math problems, his dark hair falling forward to hide his face. "What did you tell him?" "I said we would be honored, but that it was entirely his choice. No pressure either way." That night, as we prepared for bed, I shared with Michael the realization that had been forming in me over the past months. I spent so much of my life seeking my mother's approval, letting her judgment define my worth. I don't want Lucas and Mason, or Sophie, to ever feel that their value depends on meeting someone else's expectations. "They won't," Michael assured me, "because you know better. You break the cycle every day with how you love them, how you see them for who they truly are." The following weekend, I took the children to visit Daniel at the rehabilitation center. He was 8 months sober now, working part-time in the center's office and making plans for his future. The children ran to him, their initial reserve replaced by genuine joy at seeing their father healthy and present. As I watched them together, I felt a sense of rightness. This was what family should be. Imperfect people loving each other through mistakes and growth, supporting each other's healing without judgment or conditions. My mother joined us for dinner that evening, bringing a casserole and an easy conversation that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. As we sat around the table, the children chattering about their visit with Daniel, I caught my mother watching me with an expression I had rarely seen on her face, something close to admiration. Later, as she prepared to leave, she paused by the door. "You've created something beautiful here, Catherine. A home where everyone feels valued." She hesitated, then added, "I'm learning from you." Those words, so simple, yet so profound coming from her, stayed with me in the days that followed. The idea that my mother could learn from me, could see value in my approach to family and life, represented a fundamental shift in our relationship. In my office, preparing for another day in the OR, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the little girl desperate for approval to the surgeon upholding life and healing for families in crisis. From the daughter wounded by criticism to the mother determined to break that pattern. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me to a place of strength and clarity I might never have found otherwise. I straightened my surgical cap one final time and picked up the patient files for the day. Before leaving my office, I paused at the mirror, meeting my own gaze with the certainty that had been hard-won through years of doubt and determination. "You are enough," I whispered to my reflection. "You always were." As I prepare to close this chapter of my story, I want to ask you, have you ever had someone in your life who made you feel like you were never good enough? How did you find your way to self-acceptance despite their criticism? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too are enough exactly as they are. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most important judgment is the one you hold of yourself. Today, I save hearts for a living, but it took 32 years to learn that the most important heart I needed to heal was my own.